Welcome to On the Bauble podcast episode 10. I'm your host, Subasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today we'll be starting off by discussing our thoughts on October 3rd ban list, and we are going to start a new segment called FAB Fundamentals, where we discuss a very basic concept, but we're going to go as much in depth as we can to our best of our abilities. But before that, how did your week go, Yuki?
Yeah, my week's been pretty laid back, honestly. I've been just catching up on sleep. Got to go outside, do some hiking, get caught up on work a little bit. So just trying to get everything kind of back in order so I can get back to testing once, I guess now that we have the BNR announcement. So just been sort of trying to get everything in place so I can focus more on Worlds once we know exactly what the format is rather than just burning myself out and not being ready to go. So yeah, not a lot of FAB. I think we played a local armory. It was 3 drafts. Our locals really like drafts, so we did triple draft. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I did the same thing as Yuki. I just played the triple draft on last Saturday. It was fun. We got to play, what was it? Tails, Monarch, Uprising. So we got to play 3 different formats, and it was a good time. It was a good time. Okay, well, let's move on right into our main topic, which is gonna be the ban list announcement that just came out. It was only 3 hours ago, right? Maybe 4 hours ago.
Yeah, about that. We're coming off pretty fresh of the announcement. So this is definitely our initial impressions. Had a little bit of time to think about it, but still pretty fresh here.
Yeah, so the first thing is in the classic constructed format, we got 1 band card, and it's Pulse of Eisenloft. I'm pretty sad about this. I was pretty excited to play Oldhim for Worlds, and I played Oldhim at Canadian Nationals as well. And man, I'm sad. I'm sad. This card was my favorite card in the format, and the card itself, I don't think I've actually used this card as a D-React at Nationals ever. Yeah, I only used it to pitch for Oldham's ability, but even then it's just so powerful, and now it's gone, so I'm a little hesitant to play Oldham now. What do you think, Yuki?
Yeah, it's definitely arguably one of the strongest cards in the deck for Oldhim. Just kind of does everything you want. The double react, fuse Okins, it's a blue. It can be a D-React if you have to stop an Okin hold or a dominate from your opponent. So yeah, just really good card. I was honestly fine with no bans going into the ban announcement, but I think a small ban towards Oldhim does make a little bit of sense. I kind of like this ban actually. I don't think that it's really gonna. I guess I don't. Maybe it's because I don't play Oldhim as much as Jay, but I think that even though this ban hurts Oldhim, I don't think that it. I would be shocked if Oldhim is not still top tier. I think he just might not be. I think before this he was the best deck by a little bit, but you could still target him. And now I think he's just one of the top tier heroes among many. I think he's probably. My guess would be that he's probably just one of the stronger heroes and relatively in line with some of the other top picks. And it just kind of comes down to how you want to build him, what decks show up, what you want to meet. Which is a fine place to be. So overall, I'm a pretty big fan. I think it just sort of takes a little bit of the edge off of him while still keeping him pretty viable, I think. But that's without having done any testing.
Yeah, he's probably gonna still be the best control deck, I think, right? And yeah, I think the one problem he's gonna have now though is that he won't be able to target everything. And he's going to have to be a little bit more focused on what he wants to beat. Does he want to beat the mirror? Does he want to beat aggro? Or does he want to beat some other deck?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think we're starting to see this a little bit in sort of the last week of Nationals with US Nationals that I don't know if was there any Oldhams in the top 8? There was definitely less, and an Oldham didn't win U.S. Nationals. Michael Hamilton won on Icelander. But in general, U.S. Nationals didn't have as many Oldhams running around in top 8 as the others. And my guess is that it's just the pressure of needing to, wanting to try and account for the mirror. Then on the other side, there's the control decks like Dromai, Dash, and Icelander. And then all the aggro decks like Fi and Briar and Viscerai. And you can it feels like you can kind of do 2 out of the 3, but you don't have enough cards to do all 3. And I imagine just having such a flexible card like Pulse Gun will just make it so you have to commit even a little bit more to which one, which 2 you want to beat, let's say, and then just be okay into the 3rd, or be kind of average into all of them. I think you have to make some tough choices, which From a competitive standpoint, is maybe an okay thing. If you're hoping to have like a really awesome deck, though, maybe it's disappointing.
Okay, let's move on to the Blitz format. This is gonna be a pretty big banning actually. There's two cards banned, one card suspended, and one card unbanned. The two cards that got banned is Bloodchief Skeleta and Mask of Pouncing Lynx. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Let's talk about Skeleta. I think this makes a lot of sense. This is the move that they made in Classic Constructed, and I'm surprised that they didn't do the same in Blitz. I don't really think that Sonata is a problematic card. It's just Sonata with Bloodsheath Skeleta. So why not ban the problem card rather than Sonata, which just happens to be the enabler? Like, it's like the classic, like if they print another X spell, Bloodsheath Skeleta and Quill Hand is like still going to be really strong. So it just feels like a card waiting to be broken. So I think these two kind of come hand in hand, and just, yeah, making Sonata legal, banning Bloodsheath. I agreed with it in CC. I agree with it here.
Sorry, I'm actually not sure. Was Bloodchief suspended in Blitz or was it unbanned? Which one was it?
I believe it was legal, but Sonata was suspended because Sonata's moved from suspended to legal. So you could never play the combo, but I believe you could still play just Skeleta. It's just that Viserai hasn't been around, so there's been a little bit less incentive to do that, I suppose.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's now talk about Mask of Pouncing Lynx. So this one's the mask for Phi. Then really in CC, the Mask of Pouncing Lynx is doing really giving Phi a lot of reach against all these defensive decks. And it's banned here. What do you think that is?
I imagine it's just kind of the reason that they said in the article, where it being able to just reliably fetch, like it's going to fetch a Lava Burst for 5, and it's not hard to make that 6 with a Shuko or an Art of War, or like a Spreading Flame if you're playing that card. So just one equipment being worth even 5 damage, which is 25% of your life, like they said in the article, is just a lot. Like it seems like they're trying to move away from Blitz being quite as fast as it was. And I think if that is the goal, then taking out Pouncing Lynx makes a lot of sense. It's just a lot of damage to be starting with right on the board. It does kind of hurt like Ira. Like I think Pouncing Lynx kind of gave Ira a game into Oldham, and I don't know if she still will. So that makes me a little bit sad. But I think in Phi it was a little bit. I could imagine that it'd be overwhelming. I know that David Rude on Twitter has been quite vocal about how it's probably a good change, but Phi probably suffers. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, that seems fair. And then third card on the Blitz list, it's now suspended Stormstriders. How do you like this change? Do you think it's going to affect the format a lot?
I mean, I think it kind of has to. I think the common consensus was that Icelander was one of the better decks, if not the best deck in Blitz. Off of like fairly scant data, there hasn't been that much Blitz being played at a high level. But yeah, it really hurts Icelander and it really hurts Kano. I'm curious to see like how much, like, can you play Mage Master's Boots and just, I don't know, go like Aether Hail, Ice Bolt, Waning Moon as a 4-card hand, and then on their turn finish them off. Like maybe that's just good enough. Icelander I think was like very powerful, and I could maybe see overcoming it. Kano, I don't know. I'm not like an expert Kano player, but from what I have played of Kano, I can't imagine not having Stormstriders. I think you might have to rethink how that deck is being played and what it's trying to do. I don't know if you can do the Aether Wildfire combo you before you can do anything really is going to be viable.
Yeah, Stormstrider really let Kano like go off on turn 2, turn 1 even sometimes. But that's not gonna even. It's gonna be much harder to do that now without Stormstriders. So it might actually be in a better spot than before, where like you got paired up against the Kano when you're playing Blitz, and you're just like praying that they don't hit the blaze, and when they do, you just get blown up. Maybe like less of that happens now, and like it's gonna be a little bit more grindy, which might be honestly a good thing. You know, I like slower formats. I like being able to play turns and not dying on the first 2 turns. Obviously we still have like the Reinhardts out there that can still blow you up on turn 1, but you know, Reinhardt was a little bit less consistent, so I'm okay getting blown up by that deck.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree that I'm at least willing to see how this goes. I think that Wizards being taken down a notch is as Jay said, probably a good thing. I hope that I kind of wonder if Oldham's going to have much competition in Blitz. I know he does have Crown of Seeds banned there, but I don't know. I think that deck was still good even after Crown of Seeds is banned, and without the wizards to keep him in check, I don't know. Oldham's where I'm going to be starting in the Blitz format, but I think there's so much unexplored that, for me at least, it's really hard to say what's going to be good.
Yeah, but they banned Crown of Seeds basically the same time that Crown of Providence came out, and like honestly, both cards are like Crown of Providence is a really good card in Oldham, and oh, like you banned one powerful card, but then you replaced it with another powerful card, so they didn't really like Oldham didn't take that much of a hit than if it had to replace it with like some unplayable pet piece. Oh, I guess we always have a skull cap, so
Yeah, but I think even compared to Skullcap, we're seeing that Crown of Providence is a pretty big upgrade for the most part. And I think you're right that in a short game, like in a shorter game like Blitz, the difference between Crown of Providence and Crown of Seeds is a lot smaller than in CC, where you typically play more turns because of the higher life totals. So I don't know. I think Oldham could be in a really good spot in Blitz, but yeah, requires testing.
okay, so there's one other ban that I didn't put on my show notes. Yorick got banned from Ultimate Pit Fight in official events only with brackets. And you want to say anything about that?
I think that just makes sense. Like, if I was playing a sanction, so Ultimate Pit Fight is not my thing, but if it was, I could imagine not wanting to play with a hero that requires me to shuffle my deck in with everybody else's deck. That just seems like if you want to do that and that's something you want to do with your friends, that's cool. But being kind of like forced into that situation just seems
Miserable.
yeah, not great.
And the last thing I want to talk about is about the young heroes. LSS basically just made the rule that in Classic Constructed, only adult heroes can be played, and in Blitz, only young heroes can be played. Before this rules, there was some tournaments where in Classic Constructed, some young heroes got to play in it. So like, I think one of our friends, Ian, ended up playing Young Chain in a RTN, which he did steal some wins. And I think there was a Nats where there was a couple of Young Prisms that was getting some wins. So what do you think about this change?
Yeah, I believe it was New Zealand Nats where Young Prism was playing. These changes are kind of whatever to me. I don't really believe that a young hero is really going to be defining the classic constructed metagame. And if it is, I think that's a pretty big red flag. Like if a hero can just have essentially half the life total and still be dominating, like there's something very fundamentally wrong with that hero. So I don't know. I think it's kind of fine. They mentioned the Living Legend problem, like winning event in CC would give Living Legend points to the young hero, which affects Blitz, which is like kind of awkward, but also feels like maybe you could just like section those off. But I guess that just gets like really kind of bloated, and then you'll have this like young Prism with like one win just like sitting around on the Living Legend leaderboard, and you have like all the young heroes taking up space. So I mean, I kind of get it. It's probably just cleaner, and I don't think that like from a competitive standpoint it makes that big of a difference, but if there are people who really liked rocking the young heroes, then I could see that being a loss. So
Yeah, I'm on the side where I'm really sad that this is a new rule. I wanted to play Young Chain somewhere. I didn't really get a chance to do it because like I wanted to try Young Chain with like Oasis Respike, Seeds of Agony, and like Eclipse, trying to get that. We didn't really get to play with Seeds of Agony in Chain in full power, and then because the adult version got LL'd, the younger version you can still play Seeds with it. I thought that would have been sweet to do with Spellbound Creepers, but unfortunately we don't even get to see that anymore. So that's too bad. Okay, well let's move on to our next subject. So we're gonna do a section called FAB Fundamentals. We're just gonna be talking about one topic, and today we're gonna be talking about turn cycles. Yuki, do you want to try and describe? No, not describe. What's the word here? Define what turn cycle means.
yeah, so you can basically think of a turn, like one turn cycle, as like you defending with your hand and then attacking and then drawing up. So that whole turn cycle, like when you look at your 4-card hand, you decide what you want to block with, and then you attack. That is like one turn cycle, and each each player has like these turn cycles. And the idea here is that you can kind of evaluate on a very surface level how effective or efficient your turn cycle is by just doing some basic math and saying, how much damage can I present and how much damage can I prevent with this hand by blocking? And sort of just trying to go through the permutations and say, well, what is the biggest number I can make where I do the highest combination of presenting damage and preventing damage. So for example, if I can block with a 3 block and a 2 block for 5, and then spend 2 cards to attack for 7, 5 plus 7 gives me like a 12-point turn cycle. On the other hand, if I can keep that 2 block and present, let's say, like an extra 4 damage, maybe it's like a Blaze Headlong in 5, so I can go like Head Jab, Searing Ember Blade, Blaze Headlong into Phoenix Flame. That would be 7 plus 4 is 11. And then I have a 3 block, that would be 14 points. So 14 is a bigger number than 12. And so the idea here is that on some surface level, that 14-point turn is more efficient and perhaps the better play than the 12-point turn. That's kind of the basic idea. Do you have anything to add to that, the kind of basic premise?
No, I think you explained that basically perfectly. Yeah, I think the one way that I would take it is a turn cycle is once you draw up until the next time you draw up again. What I would consider a turn cycle.
Yeah. So some of the things to consider. So let's talk about some of the considerations, because to some extent you can kind of just say like, what's my best? Maybe the place to start is like, how do you decide like what your most optimal turn cycle is? Let's say you're having like trouble identifying that. What is kind of going through your head when you're looking at your 4-card hand, maybe before your opponent even attacks you? What are you thinking about to identify that like biggest possible turn cycle?
Well, typically every card in Flesh and Blood does block. So if you just start off by counting all of your blocks, you can already see your floor on your turn cycle, essentially. This is limited by if your opponent doesn't actually attack you for 12, then you won't be able to block for 12 with 4 cards. But as a base, if you have 4 cards in your hand, they all block for 3, your floor is 12. So that is the number you have to beat to make your turn more efficient. You want to make sure that you can get a turn cycle above 12. That's the very first thing I always look at.
Yeah. And even though we say 12, like especially in limited, sometimes you do have turn cycles that are worse than 12. Right? If you have like an off turn.
I think in limited, just a block, like an average block, ends up being somewhere between 10 and 11. So it's actually not gonna be 12. You're almost always gonna have a 2 block in your hand, and decks like their average block actually goes all the way down to like probably 9 or 10 because they have so many more 2 blocks. In limited, like Icelander typically gets to play like more 3 blocks, but they still have to play the ice cards, which are 2 blocks, so ends up being about 11 ish.
The next thing I typically try and do is I look at, okay, if I were to play all 4 cards, how much does that do? And compare it to my block value. So maybe I play all 4 cards, I get to 10. If I block out, I get to 11. So maybe playing all 4 cards is not great. I'm kind of losing a point of value there. So then I'll look at, well, what are my different 3-card hands? Like, what is my best 3-card hand? And I'll try and figure that out. And then I'll compare that. And I go, well, I can block with one of these cards and then play my 3-card hand. How does that compare? And then I'll do the same thing for a 2-card hand and so on. So you can kind of like, sometimes before, this is why I said like even before your opponent attacks you, sometimes they're tanking on their turn. And that's actually time for you to think and just kind of go, I like to just go like, how much does my hand block for? What's my best 4-card, 3-card, 2-card, 1-card hand? And just kind of like go through all the permutations. And then often even like order my hand where I'm like, I'm going to block with this card first, and this card second, and this card third, because I already know like all the different ways my hand can play out depending how many cards I decide I end up wanting to have.
Yes, and also one more thing that might be very good to do is even before the game starts, this is more for Classic Constructed, you can basically classify your cards for offensive cards and defensive cards. The very easiest of examples would be like cards like Fate Foreseen and Sink Below, which are just D-Reacts that block for 4 and have no offensive value. But cards like Mounting Anger, for example, in Uprising Limited, where the red one attacks for 4, but it only blocks for 2. So you're almost never going to be blocking with the red Mounting Anger and almost always using it in an attack. So when you have very clear discrepancies between like on the card itself, it can make playing your turn a lot easier. And you can think about all of this before the game even starts. And that would help you like plan out your turn and just look at what your ceiling on each of your hands are faster. And that's going to be very important if you are going to play decks like Dromai in Limited or like Oldham in CC, where you just need to play very quickly or you'll just end up not having enough time to finish your games.
Absolutely. And last thing to add onto this idea is that I think often in Limited, your deck might have, we see this especially in Monarch, but other sets as well, where your deck might have like a specific turn or a specific combination of cards that it really wants to play. And that's how you're going to close out the game. Sometimes Chain might have a sequence where it's like, I want to get a Seeping Shadows into my pitch stack with like a Riftbind in my 2. What is that card? Seeds of Agony, and that's going to be my end game setup, and like maybe one other attack in there, and that way I know I'm going to have a good end game. Or maybe you have like a big Vio the Vanguard turn as Bolton. But sometimes these decks want to have like a very specific turn that you're playing towards, and sometimes if you can, like when you're in your deck building, kind of looking through your deck and you're saying, well, I have this 1 Aether Ice Mane, that's my card to pivot off of, then you know to value that card and try and set up that card as a card that you're going to play, rather than just, maybe throwing it away and blocking with it and realizing that you needed it for a later stage in the game.
And let's talk a little bit about the Arsenal. So Arsenal typically comes up because in Flesh and Blood, there is the concept of an action point. And without having an action point, you actually don't get to deploy every card in your hand. Because it's difficult to play every card in your hand, the Arsenal becomes like a spot where you can save a card to generate some extra value on your turn cycle. Or basically, if you can't maximize on your turn cycle this turn, you can put one card to try and make your next turn cycle greater by that amount. It's a little bit hard to verbalize, but hopefully I got that point across.
Yeah, I think a way of thinking about this might be perhaps you're playing Fi and you have a Mounting Anger. And as Jay mentioned, that red Mounting Anger is a card you really want to play, but maybe you don't have any blues to pitch. You only have reds. Or perhaps you have a yellow and you can turn that yellow into a Searing Emberblade, but you don't really have the extra resource for Mounting Anger. In a lot of those hands, it's going to be really inefficient to use 2 cards to play a Mounting Anger, because that's like a 2 cards for 4, which is pretty far below rate, right? If you think about like head jab attacks for 3, 2 cards for 4 is nothing special. So I think if you kind of identify a spot where this is a really good card, but I'm not getting the most out of it right now, maybe because I don't have resources or I don't have the cards to go with it, then saving it, if you think it can be worth more value later on than playing it this turn, then it's usually right to save it as sort of like as a rule of thumb, I guess. I think what's interesting is when you don't want to do that, when it's right to play out that card instead. And usually the key consideration there is if you have your opponent at a life total where they have to block, and attacking with another card takes another card out of their hand, and you can kind of do some math about, well, what does a 2-card hand for Dromai look like versus a 3-card hand? Can I afford to let them have a 3-card hand? Have they been taking damage to keep their hand? Because that probably means their hand is good, and you might be able to kind of narrow down that maybe they have like an Ember Maw in there because they're keeping a lot of cards, so they probably have something good to do, right? So there's like a lot of contextual things you can think about, but I think at the core, it's really like, usually you want to maximize your turn cycle, and if a card isn't being maximized this turn and it's a key card, you can save it for next turn. But occasionally look for times when you can peel extra cards from your opponent's hand because they have to block, and try and identify those spots, and don't be afraid to do it if you feel like you need to strip that extra card in a really tight race.
Yeah, if there's people who want to just like mathematically look at it too, if you get to peel a card off your opponent's hand that blocked for 2, that would have had like a offensive value of 3, that's actually a very big upside on your side. because you're essentially downgrading their card. So if it's like a 2 block in their hand that would have just like attacked for 3, like a head jab, like a very good example would be a head jab. If they had a head jab and you attacked with a card and they have to block with the head jab, you essentially gain 1 life there, or you gain 1 point of advantage essentially, and that can go a long ways in a game like FAB, where a game could easily end with like one player having 1 life and the other player dying because they can't push that 1 extra life. And finding these spots where you can rip that 1 extra value off your opponent where they don't want to block is very, very important, and a very good way to win limited games of limited. CC can be a little bit more intricate than this, but limited in Flesh and Blood can really, really come down to these 1 point differences, which is why we think equipments are very important. And we can easily get this if you can continually get this 1 point of value by like having better turn cycles in your opponent each and every turn. If you play 4 turns, that's going to be like 5 life difference, and that it's very hard to swing 5 life in Flesh and Blood because that requires minimum 2 cards to do.
Yeah, just echoing all of that. Flesh and Blood really is a game about efficiencies, and getting those 1 or 2 points here and there are pretty big wins and can often end up deciding the game. Even if it's not that turn, like it can snowball and force a lot of unoptimal decisions that lead to a victory down the road. Besides your arsenal, are there ever reasons where you shouldn't be just doing the math and presenting the raw value? Like, are there times where you might value, let's say, attacking more or blocking more, even if the value is lower?
Yes, there are actually a bunch of situations that I can think of. So for blocking more, this is like a TCG concept more than a Flesh and Blood concept. Having an extra turn can be worth a lot. So even if you are sacrificing 1 point of advantage or 1 point on your turn cycle on the current turn, if you convert that 1 point into a whole turn, a 4 card hand on Flesh and Blood is worth 12. So you can think of it in a sense of like you gave up 1 point to gain the 4 cards, which would, let's say, average 10 in limited. So you're getting like a surplus of 9 in. That's the way I think of it. It might be a little bit confusing to just intake this as when I verbally say it, but that's typically how I think of it, is like if I can save enough life to have an extra turn later, that might be worth way more than that 1 point the 1 point advantage I gain earlier in the game.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, Yuki?
Yeah, so just echoing what Jay said, I think another way that you can maybe see this is sometimes this can be like the difference of, well, do I stay at 11 life, or do I block with this 3 block and go to 8 life and present a little bit more damage? If you're not, and let's say you're playing against Fi, if you're not actually taking cards out of their hand with that extra 3 block, like let's say you can I don't know, let's say you can play like a red sweeping blows for 3 and it's like relatively free and the ash is not super relevant, so you can either block for 3 or attack for 3. Sometimes even though it's like the same point value, it's not always the same, because staying at 11 means that you can probably hold cards pretty comfortably. You might be able to play like a 2 or even 3 card hand into Fi, right? If they present 12 damage, you block with a 3 block, you still have 2 life left over, you're pretty good. But if you start getting down to that like 8-9 life total, you're going to have to start giving multiple cards, and that can be a big difference. So just think about those, like, if I go to this life total, what does that mean? And like how many cards might I have to start blocking with on my opponent's next turn, assuming they have like you could even do the different scenarios, like an average turn, a really good turn, a so-so turn. You can kind of go through the computations, but I think you should definitely be thinking about the life total you're going to and the life total you're putting your opponent at, and what implications that has on your decision making.
Yeah, that sounds really good. The one other thing you said before this point was when would I want to take damage? So there are not that many spots where you want to be taking damage in limited, just because like so many of your cards are going to be so close together in value. But in CC for sure, there's going to be times where you do want to be taking the extra damage to be able to keep a card in hand. I play a lot of Oldhim, so I'm going to go back to Oldhim. I'm sorry for the people who play non-Oldhim decks, but a very common card that I would try and save is an Oakenold. Being able to have 3 Oakenold left in your deck for the second cycle or the third cycle is very, very powerful. Obviously, if you can play Oakenold fused on the first cycle, it's pretty strong. But there will be spots where I would take the 3 extra damage, so then I can pitch the Oakenold into the bottom of my deck against the decks that allow me to do this. So like against Dash, against the Mirror, and all of those a little bit grindier matchups. To basically adjust my pitch stack. We won't go into pitch stacking in this episode, but essentially being able to preserve cards for later in the game that could produce more value than if you've blocked with it this turn is probably the best time to be taking damage to save a card essentially. But a reminder is that if you take this damage and die, you don't ever get to realize your equity on the card you saved. So if you're losing the game for it, it's pretty like you're doing yourself a disfavor. Like you're essentially handing your opponent the win. So let's not do that. You need to make sure you keep in mind where you are at the game and if you can afford to keep your card too.
And also just kind of want to make a small note that one of the things to think about when you're taking damage is that you have the option to block. But once you pass up on that option to block, you've lost that life. And generally in Flesh and Blood, it's pretty hard to regain life. There are some life gain effects, of course, like Healing Bomb. But in general, you're kind of stuck with the life total that you have. And so taking damage is always like a pretty big consideration. And sometimes even though like 2 plays might be the same point value, keep in mind that you can sometimes run into problems where like what's a good example? Like if you can attack for 8 or block for 8, sometimes you can wind up in this, like you have a really bad hand, let's say. If you just take 8 to attack for 8, your opponent can choose to, I don't know, block with 3 cards and preserve their life, keep 1 card and come back, and then you're just way behind because you're down 8 life on that exchange. So sometimes even though it's like a raw point value, you have to think about like what happens if my opponent just blocks? Is it actually worth it? And sometimes just preserving that life total is valuable because you can't like go back and undo that life loss once it's happened. So just I sometimes see newer players like being a little bit too willing to take damage, and it's just like something to keep in mind is that you can't undo that. And sometimes if it's close, I might lean towards taking damage unless you're really like your game plan is just to try and burst them down and like kill them as fast as you can, and you want the game to be as short as possible. Sometimes it's like that.
Yeah, I think a good rule of thumb to that point would be if it's equal in value, you should probably be blocking over attacking. And you really do want a reason to attack than to have a reason to block. I think that's all I have for turn cycles. Do you have anything else to say?
I think that pretty much sums it up. So I guess just to kind of like go through the main points again, turn cycle, you can think of it as your damage presented plus damage prevented. Usually it's good to maximize this. However, there's going to be spots where you might want to arsenal, or you might want to save a card in your deck, or you might want to... those are kind of like the big ones where you would deviate, but I would look for those, but be aware that most of the time you are just presenting raw numbers. Like that is usually the right play. And then the last kind of point that we had was that if it is close in value, if it's roughly the same, thinking about the life totals that you're going to is very important. Like thinking about maybe getting that extra turn that Jay was talking about is important. And generally preserving your life is worth a little bit more than presenting damage to your opponent, unless you're forcing cards out of their hand because they have to block.
I think it's going to be a short episode today, but I think it's going to be a good... You want to close it out?
Thanks for listening, everybody. If you have any questions that you want answered on our show, please comment on our most recent YouTube video with your questions, or message me on Twitter at ukulebender. You can also email your questions to onthebauble@gmail.com. We really appreciate any feedback and comments you can give us. And, if there's a FAB fundamental or a core concept that you're curious about and you want to have talked about, let us know. I think we'll kind of we'll visit this series periodically. It's not going to be all FAB fundamentals, but we will be coming back to it. And if there's something you're keen on, please let us know. We'd love to cover whatever our viewers are interested in. I think that's it. I think you can just cut it there.
So, I hear you started testing for FAB again?
Yeah, my testing group has been, we're kind of located all over. We have some players in Canada, US, two in New Zealand, and two in Netherlands. So quite international. But our testing group has been super, super active lately. The Discord has just been like going crazy. Our major points of discussion in preparation for Worlds has been things like our Myers-Briggs type tests. So it's like a personality test. We've been talking about our Harry Potter houses. We've been doing like the sorting hat quizzes and talking about what houses we're in and looking at our compatibility. We had another really good one just recently. What was it? I think it was like a learning types quiz. And we also did Chinese zodiac as well. So we've been kind of like doing all the rounds and making sure that we all really understand each other very, very well. So I guess all of this is to say that we're like super prepared for Worlds, and other teams better be pretty scared.
Wow.
I guess on a more serious note, I think everybody's tired from nationals, and we've been kind of waiting for the BNR announcement. But it's a friend group, so we just like to joke around and have fun, anyways. So it's been fun, but yeah, definitely been a bit of a downtime for us.
Okay. I thought you were gonna give us some like super spicy tech that somebody found, but you know what? Sorting hat. That's Harry Potter quizzes might be the secret to improving your game now. Yeah, all the best players are in your testing group, right?
I wouldn't say all the best players, but we definitely have some good players.
Yeah. Like, who do you guys have in that Discord right now?
Who do we have that
Notable.
people might know? We have Ian Zhang, who top aided Pro Tour Leo. We have Eric Lair from Spark of Genius. We have Oliver Fee from OKNY. We have Kiki and Jason from New Zealand. John Ho from America. Jimmy from Netherlands as well.
Wow,
Ian
real
and
international
Jimmy are from
group.
Netherlands. Yeah, we have people from all over, but definitely quite a few people who are known for content, and many of them who have
This crushes tournament.
various results under their belt. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think that's wrap it up for tonight. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Good night.